welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to discuss 5 common patterns that I see happen in enmeshed family systems so that you can build more awareness, which is going to help you in your process of healing from enmeshment. So the first pattern is parentification. Parentification is a characteristic pattern of enmeshed family systems, and it's one where I ultimately consider a role reversal is happening. What do I mean by that? Well, the evolutionary purpose of the family system is to bring new members of our species into the world and to give to those new members, to create an environment for the growth and development of those new members in their very long childhood and dependency process so that they can become fully functioning adult members of our species. So that means that the family system, there is a hierarchy. The parents must serve the developmental and emotional needs of the children, of the needier, more incapable members of the family systems. That's totally normal and healthy, in sort of the evolutionary kingdom. In enmeshed family systems, because of the emotional immaturity of the parents, because of the lack of emotional boundaries, there is a role reversal that happens where the children now end up serving the emotional and developmental needs of the parent. They end up parenting their own parents, which is inappropriate. It's developmentally inappropriate for children. Children are, needy and unconscious for the most part. They're going through a complex developmental process. That's appropriate for them to go through that process, and to have older members of their species, adult members of their species, help them in that. And it's not appropriate for them. They don't have the capacity to serve the emotional needs of other adults. They need all the help they can get. They can't interrupt their process in order to serve the needs of the adults. It's supposed to be the other way around. So parentification is a role reversal, an inappropriate role reversal. So this impairs the emotional development of that child, because that child has to put their own needs on hold. They have to self-sacrifice. They have to suppress themselves in order to fill the needs of their parents or other siblings in that family system, because that's what's being expected of them in the enmeshed family system. So when you're healing from enmeshment, you kind of got to look at that and realize how that's impacted you, and now start to set boundaries with that. Make sure you stop parenting your parents and start to now parent yourself, right? Fill in the gap, fill in the void that your parents ultimately left, because they only emotionally parented you up until a certain point, if at all. And then you ended up parenting them, which means that now you must go in and parent yourself. Bring yourself up into emotional maturity, since they did not serve your emotional needs. So it's a process of reparenting. The second pattern that I see is projection. So parental projection is something that I've already talked about on my channel, but it is a very common pattern in enmeshed family systems as well. And this is because, again, in enmeshed family systems, parents are emotionally immature. They're largely unconscious of their emotional world, their unresolved emotional issues, their unlived life, their unlived dreams. So parental projection is a process by which parents project their unresolved emotional issues, their unresolved attachments with their own caregivers, with their partners, husband, wives, with their own siblings, in general in their own lives, and their own unlived dreams, their own unlived desires, wishes, expectations, hopes, and so they project all of these things onto the children. They live vicariously through their children. They project fears and anxieties of the things that they failed at, or whatever traumas they had, and they project their unresolved attachments, whatever unresolved dysfunctional patterns they had with their own parents. They then project that onto their own children. So it's a process of projecting that stuff instead of looking within and dealing with their own emotional issues, living their own life and their own dreams. They put that on the child, and the child then bears the burden of that. It's a lot of pressure to deal with all of that. So this can manifest in anxiety, depression, shutdown, acting out, general overwhelm. But the child ends up having to disconnect from their true self, which is whatever is authentically going on within them, to live up to the expectations or live according to the fears and anxieties of their parents. So projection can be very, very detrimental for a child. One of the ways to begin unraveling projection is to just observe where that was happening and to not take it on anymore. When you're an adult and now you're starting to heal from enmeshment, you have to look at where your parents have been projecting on you and start to disidentify with that, because as children and as adolescents, we don't know any better. We're very connected to our parents. We're enmeshed with them, and so we identify with what they project onto us. If they think we're a failure at something, if they significantly criticize us because they're scared of us failing at something, or if they project some sort of expectation or success on us, that they live vicariously through, such as following a career path that they wanted for us, or playing a sport and succeeding at that sport that they want for us. These are all projections that may not actually be aligned with who we really are, what we really want, what we really need, what we really feel. And so in adult life, we have to begin unraveling those projections, disidentifying with them, and begin connecting to our true self, the things that we really need, the things that we really want, the things that we really desire, the things that we're really naturally good at. Our true fears. Our parents' fears may not be our fears. They may be scared of something for us that we're not actually scared of, but we were identifying with that fear. So in the process of healing from enmeshment, you begin disidentifying with their projections. The third pattern that is really common is triangulation. So triangulation is a really common pattern in enmeshed family systems, because it's a way that people use to manage their emotional immaturity, their incapacity to deal with complex emotional tension that exists naturally in any relationship. Now, to one degree or another, triangulation is a way that humans manage life and relationships, so it will exist in one degree or another, even in healthy people. And I do believe that there's a healthy and constructive way of triangulating, but in enmeshed family systems, it exists at a very, very dysfunctional level. So triangulation, imagine that, every human relationship has a level of emotional connection. In that emotional connection between two people, there are going to be differences because we're two different people. So that's natural, right? Those differences are a natural and healthy part of our existence. But those differences create emotional tension in the bond. Now, the way that we deal with that emotional tension determines or is dependent on and determined by how emotionally mature we are, meaning how well we can deal with, own, take responsibility for, feel through, understand, process, and communicate our emotions. If we have a very hard time sitting with our emotions, processing our emotions, communicating our emotions relationally, we're going to find ways to distract from or escape those emotions, deflect and protect ourselves from feeling those emotions. So that is when we triangulate. So we can triangulate a third member, a third human being. That's the most common way of doing it. But I also talk about how we triangulate other things, other people, other places. So you can triangulate, for example, when I see a couple who has a lot of emotional tension between themselves and they watch a lot of TV, if that television is used to decrease the emotional intensity and the emotional conflict that exists between them, instead of them, actually sitting with each other, for example, at the dinner table every night and having a truly emotionally intimate and emotionally honest conversation with each other, if they're avoiding that, if they're avoiding resolving the emotional tension between them and just watching TV or going out with their friends or, immersing in substances or whatever things they may be doing, using a third thing to decrease intensity, to distract from the emotional intensity of intimacy, that is a form of triangulation. But in enmeshed family systems, obviously that happens a lot with triangulating other people. So triangulating other people, for example, could be two parents that have constant emotional tension between them, triangulating in their child, either by over focusing on that child and projecting onto that child and always worrying and talking only about that child. That's a way of like distracting, putting all your focus on the child and distracting from what's going on here between the two adults and actually growing up emotionally here. But it could also be directly, pulling that child into the conflict and pitting that child up against each parent. That's a form of triangulation too, which I think is even worse. Another form of triangulation, it could happen between any members of a family. For example, triangulation can be like if a mother and a daughter are having conflict and the mother goes and gossips to the younger sibling. That's a form of triangulation because she's not seeking to resolve the emotional conflict with her daughter or the emotional intensity with her daughter. She's trying to vent and, sort of like cathartically, expel that emotional discomfort she's feeling onto it by pulling another member and ending up putting that other member against the daughter, like siding, by the younger sibling, for example, siding with her or validating her. This makes her feel better about herself and her position instead of actually having to reflect on her position and resolve that conflict directly with her daughter. So now she's triangulated in the younger sibling, or she can triangulate in the dad. This can happen in any which way, right? There are various combinations of this. You have to reflect on how this is specifically happening in your family system. But again, triangles are really, really common. Another form of triangulation can be triangulating in, someone outside of the family system. And that can end up being constructive. I do also differentiate between, destructive or dysfunctional triangulation and constructive triangulation. Constructive triangulation is when you seek, external support, for example, going to a therapist and actually seeking advice or processes to help you resolve that original conflict. Anything that if you're triangulating as a form of trying to improve the relationship and you actually take ownership and then go back to that relationship and work on the conflict, that's a healthy form of triangulation. Unhealthy triangulation, dysfunctional triangulation is when you're doing that either to distract from the conflict altogether, deflect, escape from the conflict altogether, or you're doing it to like get someone to take your side and to not have to take ownership of facing that direct conflict. Fourth pattern that's really, really common is emotional contagion. Emotional contagion to me is obviously classic of enmeshed family systems because of the lack of boundaries. So the blurred boundaries lead to, messy, leaky emotional energy in the family system. So one person's emotions triggers and activates the other person's emotions and maybe even triggers and activates the entire family system. So imagine somebody coming home from work and being in a really angry mood, and the entire family system getting like agitated and reactive to that. So one person sets the mood. That's a form of emotional contagion, and that's because people in an enmeshed family system are not taking responsibility for grounding themselves, for seeing themselves as an emotionally separate being from others, which doesn't mean that you can't empathize with or connect with the person who's feeling anxiety, frustration, whatever. You still can, and you can still be a resource to them, a support system to them, but it's different than getting lost in their emotions. So emotional contagion to me is about everybody getting lost in everybody else's emotions and collapsing, versus people having a natural emotional experience and then us just being empathetic and connecting with them and helping them through that. So emotional contagion, think of it as like an ungrounded electrical network, like all the wires are all over the place and tangled and, you know, not protected, and so everybody's getting zapped all the time, and you know, things are explosive, and even sometimes it sets fire, versus like a neatly organized electrical system that each individual node is separate and well defined, and then there are clear connections, you know, clear electrical wires connected from one person to the next, and there's a, you know, an adequate grounding system, and you can like turn on and off the electricity from one part of the system to the other, and stop it when necessary. This is like an organized, differentiated family versus a family, an enmeshed family system. It's got a messy electrical network, and therefore you have emotional contagion, right? Electricity's kind of gone haywire. The fifth and last common pattern that I see in family systems is overfunctioning. So overfunctioning is a pattern in enmeshed family systems where it's, I mean, exactly what it sounds like. We are overfunctioning for other people. We are taking responsibility for their emotions. We are jumping in to save them. We are playing therapist when it's not our responsibility to. You know, we are taking on way more than what is appropriate for our role as an individual human being in relationship with that person. And that makes it so also that other person underfunctions. It's kind of a chicken or the egg situation, because, well, is it the other person's emotional underfunctioning that's making us step in to overfunction for them? Or is it the fact that we keep overfunctioning and stepping into caretake when we really should take a step back and just allow the person time and space to figure their own stuff out and self-regulate. So again, I want to be very, very clear. And, you know, as we become more self-differentiated, doesn't mean that like we abandon people and leave them isolated, completely alone to resolve all their issues on their own. It's different. In, you know, when we become more self-differentiated, it's a healthy balance where people, you know, everybody takes responsibility for their own emotions, and they take responsibility for asking for support when they need it. And, you know, we're also not stepping in and overfunctioning and trying to save others when they haven't actually asked us to do that. So, but, you know, and also managing like whether or not we have the capacity in that moment. So if they are asking us or demanding that we step in and overfunction for them, like, are we capable? Like, do we have the space right now? Having healthy boundaries around that right now. Having healthy boundaries around that, and being able to say, well, not right now, you know, or I can help you later, or I can help you tomorrow, I can hold space for you tomorrow. So overfunctioning and underfunctioning is very, very common in enmeshed family systems. And it's actually healthier if, you know, the overfunctioning person learns to pull back a little bit and the underfunctioning person learns to step up a little bit. But that can only happen if we're starting to break those patterns and if we're aware of them in the first place. So sometimes we're blaming someone for being an underfunctioner, and it's not necessarily their fault. It might be actually a factor of the fact that if there's somebody's always over functioning for them, they may not actually ever learn to, or they may be totally capable of handling themselves, but because there's someone always stepping in, they never have the space or the time to actually show that they're capable. So for example, maybe you have a very emotionally dysregulated mom, and she's always freaking out, and she's always projecting her feelings on everyone else, and she's always expecting everyone else to soothe her and to save her and da-da-da. And maybe there's one person who's always stepping in to do that, to play therapist for her, to play soother, to play co-regulator. And so you have there a classic overfunctioning, underfunctioning pattern. And so to break that, you know, the overfunctioner has to sometimes set boundaries and say, you know what, Mom, I'm not going to step in and save you right now. And mom has to sometimes be like, you know what, it's not my child's responsibility to soothe my emotions right now. I need to be able to learn how to do this for myself in this moment. I need to use the resources that I do have internally or externally, seek out other adults, seek out a therapist, and function a little bit more emotionally. All right, guys, so there you have it. 5 common patterns that I see happening in enmeshed family systems. Comment down below and tell me what you see. How do you see some of these patterns showing up in your family system? How do they show up for you? And are there any other patterns that you think are really, really common that I haven't mentioned here? All right, take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.